Right, so we've talked a wee bit about databases now. I wanted to give you a concrete example just to bring it all to life. So we talked a little bit about how a spreadsheet feels really similar to a database, and although in real life it's very, very different underneath a database, acts entirely differently. Thankfully, no-code tools, they tend to make the database look like and feel like a spreadsheet. So there's a lot of familiarity there, and things tend to work in the same way. So in this example, I'm going to imagine that we've got a database of orders, and maybe let's consider that as orders for a t-shirt website, for example. And as a result, we need to know what the orders are, when were they placed, what items were they for. We need to know what items we've got available, so what t-shirts are we selling, and then we need to know who the customers are, so who's buying it, what's their address, what's their email, how do we get in touch. So if you were going to whip this up in a spreadsheet, this is kind of how it would look. And if you've not used Google Spreadsheet before, it kind of just works exactly the same as Excel. So hopefully you've tried a spreadsheet before and this all looks really familiar. But essentially we're just going to have a column here for name, one here for address, one here for email. That's going to list out all our customer details. And then if I look down here, you can see that this is not only one spreadsheet I've made, but I've got another couple of sheets within the spreadsheet. And that's exactly the same as the way that a table works in a database. You're going to have one set of information perhaps around customers, and that's one group. And then you're going to have another group of information, for example, around about orders that you don't want to kind of interfere with. And we might say, right, okay, this order was for John Smith, and this one was for Joan Blogs, and this one was for Jane Smith. And that's how we kind of get that tie back between here and our customers that we've got. And so it's just a really, really basic way of capturing information. You can typically go somewhere around 25,000 different rows, something like that, within Excel and or Google Sheets before it starts to get a problem. What databases are really good at is tying relationships between all these bits of data, which we'll talk about what that means in a minute. But they're also very good at just handling like millions and millions and millions of different rows of data. Now, the one thing that's kind of different in a spreadsheet from a database is if you use a spreadsheet the way that I've just laid it out, then we can see that, right, clearly row number 2 here is John Smith, and then you've got his address, and you've got his email, and then you've got Joe Blogs, his address, so on and so forth. We've just kind of decided that information ties together. But in reality, in a spreadsheet, I can start typing stuff wherever I want. I could just decide, well, I'm going to have an order count here, and I'm going to say, right, how many orders and how many customers. I just type that information in willy-nilly, and I can write 4, 3, whatever, and that's fine. Spreadsheet's okay with that. That's where we start to get the difference between a spreadsheet and a database. So let's go over here. Now this is a tool called AirTable. And AirTable is probably the most popular no-code database out there. In fact, it is by far. And people will use it for building no-code apps by having all their customer data or whatever else it might be coming here. But a lot of people also just use it as a project management tool or a way to kind of collaborate with people. You can think about it a bit like a database that other people can kind of real-time collaborate on, can do stuff on. And so it's really powerful, really, really flexible. So I've kind of started with a bit of a demo spreadsheet here. You can see we've got different bits of data. Let's kind of follow the same process in Airtable of setting that up and find out why it's a little bit different. So I'm going to start with my first table. Let's change that to customers. And you see I've got a name here, so that's brilliant. All right, we've got John Smith, we've got Joe Blogs, we've got Jane Smith. Now you can see there's not a bunch more cells here for me to click into. It's all kind of hidden away, and I'll talk about why that is in a second. Let's go ahead and add another column to our database. Now Airtable will call this a field. A lot of other databases will call this a field. That's kind of the technical name for it. And you'll immediately see, it doesn't just add a field for me to start typing, and it gives me a bunch of options. So I can have a field which is a single line of text, there's long text, there's a checkbox, there's a date, a phone number, all this different stuff. So I'm going to do address here, so I'm just going to do a single line of text. Now I know that most addresses are several lines, but bear with me, we're trying to keep this simple. And if I click add field here, I'm going to capture the customer's email address. Now you'll see I've got a specific field for this, and let's call that email address. Now that's going to let me type in whatever I like, But that's just because I'm editing the database directly. If you had a no-code app and you had specified that this column was only allowed to take an email address, it would only take a valid email address. So if I had a john.smith and just left it like that, it wouldn't accept that. It's going to accept it when I do john.smith@gmail, joe@blogs.com, jane@hotmail.com, if you can remember that service. So it's going to accept that, and in a single line of text field, it's going to accept anything because it just accepts text, So let's do 64 Zoolean, and you can see I keep typing whatever I'm saying out loud. So let's do Savile Row. Let's do 2 Terrace Gardens this time. So we've got some basic data in there. I can't add anything else, and so this is where we kind of get into the key difference. When I look at Excel, this is just treated as a line. I can type anything into it. I've just happened to decide that I'm going to put names and stuff in here and give that a header. But Excel or Google Spreadsheet doesn't really care what the data actually is or what it means. Airtable, on the other hand, really cares. It's really strict. I can only put data in here if I've selected a column that Airtable accepts, if I've put data in it that Airtable accepts. And this is a really important part. Every single one of these rows is tied together. It's considered one big piece of information. And so, if I click this, I think it brings it to life a little bit. This isn't just a collection of cells on a spreadsheet. This is a record of John Smith and everything that we know about him. We could add tons of different stuff in here. We could add his date of birth. We could make that a date, and it would just start collecting all this information. And so what that means is in the future, this information is all going to be stored, and in the future I can come back and retrieve it, and I can just type in, John Smith, and get everything I need to know about John Smith. So that's a really, really critical part about databases, because you suddenly care about each record. Each record becomes a user, it could become an order, it could be, whatever you need for your app. But the important part is you're always going to be able to retrieve that information about that person, about that item from that one record. And so you'll start to notice as we go through different kind of aspects of building apps, of workflows, etc. We're going to keep coming back to the record, because this is going to be the central repository of all the information you want to store about somebody or something. And so, that's when tables become very, very important, because I want to make sure my data is well organized and it's going to be easy for me to find in the future. So if I go ahead here and click add table, then I can start to think about my orders. It comes with all these default columns that I don't need, so I can delete them. I can really start to think about what's the structure of my database going to look like. So I'm going to my customers, going to my orders. The other one I think we had was inventory, so on and so forth. And you can imagine, just in the way that I've set out this, I would set out orders and inventory with the same sort of details that I've put here, except if I look at inventory, and if I get rid of these columns and decide that I'm going to add a column for example, the number of items left in stock. Let's go ahead and do that. I'll just show you what happens. So I'm saying, items in stock. And what happens is, if I type 2, it works. If I type 5, it doesn't. Now, if you can hear that in the mic, I'm trying to type in. It doesn't work because it's really limited to that type of data. And I could say this is, let's say white t-shirt. So, you kind of keep coming back to this idea that the data is fixed. You've got to give it the right data. You can decide the data up front, but when your app's actually running, it's not going to take a word instead of a number. It's not going to take a false email. It's going to make sure everything looks right, everything's correct, and everything's tied back to that one record for each person. So you can always see all of the relevant information about something. So we'll stop there. Databases now get a little bit more complex, and let's talk a wee bit about relationships.